How's it going guys, Chris here, and in this guide we're going to be running through all the Bedlam Raider enemy types and bosses you'll be able to find throughout Star Wars Jedi Survivor. The Bedlam Raiders are a group of marauders and bandits who you're going to need to take on over your journey. Because the Bedlam Raiders have access to loads of old Separatist droids from the Clone Wars, you can expect to run into a fair few B1 battle droids over the course of the game. This small army has been reprogrammed to fight for the Bedlam Raiders, armed with E5 blaster rifles to shoot their targets over range. And while they're not known for being particularly effective in combat, generally being quite clumsy and slow to react, they can still potentially do some damage and chip away at your health if you're not careful. Of course, those goofy B1 battle droids are one of your least concerns, easily turned into scrap with simple lightsaber strikes, blaster shots or force abilities, making them one of the weakest enemies you'll encounter. Which, if you've seen the prequels, you'd probably expect nothing different. Their own blaster shots can be reflected back, letting you use their own weapons against them and deal with them over distance, and most of the time, B1 battle droid shouldn't cause you any problems. Though you will need to watch out for them lobbing thermal detonators at you in the middle of a fight, giving you another thing to avoid or throw back. Along with all that blaster fire too, which might be trickier to dodge if there's multiple enemies around to deal with at once. Essentially being the next step up from the B1 battle droid, the B2 model, aka the Super Battle Droid, is a more advanced and powerful droid that was employed throughout the Clone Wars, and now also repurposed to do the Bedlam Raiders' bidding. They might seem quite slow and docile in nature, having limited movement during combat, but they've got a lot more firepower and armour to make up for that, armed with dual wrist blasters and rockets for double the punch, able to soak up a lot more damage too from your own attacks and lightsaber swings. It's definitely a good idea to lob those flying rockets back using the Force, knocking out decent chunks of the droid's health. Those blasters on the other hand might fire quickly, but they can also still be reflected back or blocked off, taking a bit of time in between firing cycles to recharge, letting you close in for a few melee strikes up close, where the B2 battle droid is at more of a disadvantage, with most of its strongest attacks being those fired weapons. That doesn't mean they won't give you a nasty smack up close though, still being able to lash out with punches and jabs. Though most of the time, they'll resort to those guns instead, which can be used against the droid or avoided while you're closing for a lightsaber frenzy, taking advantage of the droid's lack of mobility. As for the raiders themselves, the standard variant comes in the form of the Raider Grunt, fairly basic enemies armed with electro staffs who attack using melee strikes in close quarters. Despite being lower down in the pecking order, these grunts are still trained to use that staff to the best of their ability, sometimes able to block off your lightsaber swings while throwing in a few unblockable attacks of their own, generally making them tougher opponents than the standard droids. With the electro staffs being pretty long weapons, this actually gives them a decent amount of range, despite using melee based attacks, and in a fight against multiple raiders at once, these quick jabs and swings can often be tricky to dodge or block, with their strikes being able to reach over a further distance than some of the other enemies that you're used to taking on. They're not exactly brilliant fighters, quickly running out of stamina as you parry their attacks, and this is going to leave them vulnerable and open to getting a lightsaber lodged in their chest cavity. But nevertheless, they're still a threat that will need to be dealt with, and because they often like to jump out from the shadows and use the element of surprise, this can let them land the first blow, which can be especially problematic if you're already quite low on health. Along with the blaster firing battle droids, you'll also be faced with the B1 Melee Droid, which you can probably guess chooses to attack using melee strikes up close. These are essentially the very same droids that you've already sliced your way through many times before, only now being equipped with their own spiky makeshift batons, with the droids taking one for the team and dashing over in a blind attempt to try and best you in a fight. The melee droids don't have any extra armour than the battle droids, and are therefore going to fall apart like a wet tissue after taking damage, with their lunges easy to parry and their stamina being practically non-existent. But unlike the other B1 variants, these guys are a lot more aggressive and gung-ho, despite being no match for a Jedi in hand-to-hand combat. Though in larger groups all working together to overcome you, they can still potentially pose a bit of a problem, especially if one catches you off guard while you're distracted by another. There's definitely strength in numbers, but otherwise the poor bugger doesn't really stand much of a chance. Some of the more hardened warriors belonging to the Bedlam Raider group are the Raider Veterans, rewarded for their greater skill by having better weapons and equipment. This makes them tougher enemies than the basic grunts, with these guys being kitted out with their own jetpack and a beefy looking pronged electro staff, both giving the veteran better effectiveness when attacking their opponents and defending themselves in combat. You can expect the Raider veterans to put up more of a fight, throwing in more unblockable strikes as they use that jetpack to both dodge out of the way and swoop in for some quick jabs, making their movements harder to predict, having a variety of different attacks and maneuvers. Destroying their jetpack is going to limit the raiders' mobility, making them grounded for the rest of the fight. Though no matter how they choose to take you on, getting hit by that staff is going to hurt pretty bad, with the veteran strikes being powerful and frequent, which if you're not ready for can wipe out huge chunks of health, finishing you off quickly if you're already a bit low. It's typically best to parry the veteran raiders' jabs whenever you can, and always be prepared to dodge out of the way of those unblockable ones, which are often thrown at you when you least expect. With the B1 and B2 droids essentially being cannon fodder for the Separatist army, expendable foot soldiers thrown out on the battlefield in large numbers, the BX series commando droids were much more advanced and specialised, designed to infiltrate enemy lines and generally do the much more important jobs. They're a lot smarter, tougher and more agile than the other ones, programmed with better combat tactics and awareness, now working for the Bedlam Raiders, with different droid models being equipped with different weapons and fighting styles. The standard BX droid takes on its targets with a Vibro-Sword in close quarters, using mobility to its advantage by jumping around the place and fighting with acrobatics, using the environment to strike from high vantage points, with attacks that are quicker and less predictable overall. These Vibro-Sword BX droids can block off some of your lightsaber swings and blaster shots, while having a few unblockable moves of their own, forcing you to stay on your toes and watch its movements carefully to avoid getting caught out by one of those deadly slashes. Some of these BX droids carry blaster rifles instead, initially used for covert operations and special sniper assignments. They function a bit like the B1 battle droids, only less dumb and dopey, being more aware of their location in the fight, retreating to safer positions, and moving around more to try and avoid your attacks. They can deliver rapid bursts of fire if you get too close by, which can be effective for dealing damage quickly, and they're also prone to dropping sneaky grenades too, often at unexpected moments as you try and get closer. The last variant of the BX droid is the hybrid, armed with both the Vibro-Sword and the blaster, using a combination of the two to keep switching up his attacks during the fight. He's got a more advanced moveset than the other variants, often resorting to blaster fire over range before closing in for some strong melee attacks up close, giving you even more things to watch out for, with the BX hybrid being effective over pretty much all combat ranges. Some of the Bedlam Raider warriors you'll encounter have been given superior equipment, gadgets, and even their own lightsabers from Rayvis himself, the leader of the group. These are the high-ranking lieutenants, which sort of act like mini-bosses with their own identity. They're well respected amongst the raiders, and for good reason. They've earned their position by being extremely loyal and highly skilled in battle, basically being the best of the best. Despite running into quite a few of these guys over your journey, there's two specific types of lieutenants, trained with their own individual fighting styles and weapons. One type is the single-bladed warrior, armed with a crossguard lightsaber to take you on with heavy lunges, along with several rapid-fire blasters and high-powered grenades, allowing them to attack over any range effectively. Along with being agile, these guys have also got a cloaking device, allowing them to temporarily disappear during the fight. You can counter this by force pushing them, causing that cloak to malfunction, or you can just pay attention to their ghost-like signature left behind, which you should be able to make out if you look carefully. As for the other lieutenant type, these guys carry double-bladed lightsabers instead, primarily resorting to rapid combos and fast flurries of strikes up close. This generally gives them a more aggressive fighting style, with pretty much all of their attacks being melee-based, and a bit more skilled at blocking and parrying your strikes, having that longer lightsaber, which is also better at blocking or blaster shots too, meaning it's often best to fight fire with fire and rush in with some offensive tactics yourself. You've also got to beware of a sneaky wrist-mounted grappling hook, which can be used as both a traversal tool and a weapon, to inflict damage or put themselves in a better position to deal damage with that lightsaber, either by grabbing a hold and latching onto you, or swinging themselves closer if you're further away, outside of their lightsaber's attack range. Another iconic Separatist droid from the Clone Wars has now rolled its way into the hands of the Bedlam Raiders, with reprogrammed Droidekas also being a part of their miniature army. Often referred to as destroyers down to their unforgiving nature, these droids would normally be a total nightmare to be up against, having several aspects to make them brutal foes on the battlefield. They're protected by a tough shield which blocks off blaster fire and melee strikes. They can traverse around the environment quickly by rolling up into a ball to relocate and switch positions, and they've also got two powerful twin repeating blasters built into their arms, which can cut down multiple targets one after the other with ease. Droidekas are pretty relentless, with those energy shields soaking up a lot of the damage they receive, especially blaster fire, making reflected shots less effective than usual. Though without those shields they're basically screwed, and because you can overload them by rapidly attacking in close range, this makes the droid a bit less threatening to a skilled Jedi such as yourself. it's generally best to use aggressive tactics against them, with those shields only being able to withstand so many lightsaber strikes. Getting up close will often force the droid to roll up and retreat, giving you a window of opportunity to hack away at it while that shield's down. And if you can manage to force it into a corner, well, you'll gain the upper hand, with the Droideka having nowhere to escape to allow its shields to reset, letting you chop it up into pieces while it's sitting around helplessly. Another pretty ruthless droid you'll often come face to face with is the Magnaguard, one of the most fearsome battle droids in the Separatist army. Often known to act as bodyguards for high-ranking officers and leaders, these Magnaguards are armed with special electro staffs, capable of withstanding lightsaber strikes, thus making them a tougher opponent for a Jedi to take on. They're not only highly skilled when it comes to using that electro staff, but they're also pretty good at dodging your attacks and diving around the area to hit you from unexpected angles. A lot of their attack patterns are pretty relentless, with strikes flowing quickly one after the other in persistent chains, which can potentially be devastating to your health bar if you get caught off guard during a combo. With that said, this often leaves them open to getting parried after each strike, letting you sap away at their stamina quickly, providing you can time those counters correctly, that is. So although they can be super aggressive, all of that offensive power can be channeled against them. You'll still need to watch out for some of the nasty unblockable attacks they like to throw at you in between, and you'll also have to be aware that even if you manage to lop off their head, that doesn't mean the fight's over just yet, with the Magnaguard still able to take you on fine enough without it. One of the beefiest enemies you'll bump into is the Bedlam Smasher, a heavily armoured brute armed with a great big electro hammer who's out to cause a bit of carnage. These are the tough guys in the raider ranks who prefer to use slow but powerful attacks with longer wind-up times, which might make those hammer swings easier to read, but also means they can be much more punishing if you don't. This puts added pressure on you to block and dodge incoming attacks, with strikes having devastating consequences if they connect, so it can often be best to respect the Bedlam Raider's extra power rather than diving in headfirst with a gung-ho mindset, like you probably would with some of the weaker enemies. Another reason for this is due to some of their unblockable attacks being tricky to avoid, particularly the overhead slam move, which overcharges the hammer, creating electrical explosions and shockwaves as it hits the floor, along with a leaping slam attack, which can be used to gain ground quickly and attack you over distance. A bit of an unexpected move that might catch you out, due to the Smasher generally having those slow and heavy characteristics. The leader of the Bedlam Raider group is the hardened warrior known as Rayvis, a Jedi killer from the High Republic era who kept lightsabers as tokens from the Jedi he defeated, many of which have been gifted his lieutenants. The only one to actually beat Rayvis in combat is Jedi Master Dagan Gera, who Rayvis chose to serve thereafter as a reward for sparing his life. After encountering Rayvis a few times over your journey, you'll eventually be pitted against him on the Shattered Moon base, where a big boss fight ensues, spanning over a couple of stages. It's quite easy to see how Rayvis managed to slay so many Jedi over the years, pretty much having a whole arsenal of weapons and gadgets at his disposal. Because he's got so many toys to play around with, you're going to have to be prepared to get hit by several different things, from a specialised mace, rapid fire blasters, and even his own bloody barrage rockets, littering the place with explosives. All stuff that you'll need to either counter, block or jump out of the way of to avoid taking a bunch of damage. It might seem like a good idea to stand back and play defensively, but a lot of Rayvis' attacks can reach over long ranges, with that mace extending out to slap you around if you're hanging at the back of the room, along with all the projectiles and blaster shots he likes to fire at you too. For this reason, it's best not to be a coward in this case and take him up close in a parrying war, staying vigilant to slope out of the way of those unblockable strikes whenever he chooses to throw one into the mix. Just when you think you've wiped the floor with him and deleted all of his health, he does that annoying boss battle trope where he comes back again for round 2, with yet another beefy health bar. Only this time, because you've slashed off some of his armour, his weird tentacly body underneath becomes exposed on one side, and he's not exactly very happy about it, throwing pretty much everything he's got at you, and turning the place into a proper fireworks show. You can expect this phase to play out a bit like the first one, only much faster paced, with Rayvis using his weapons in new combos, and generally attacking you with a lot more enthusiasm, being much more wound up. This is where it'll probably help to play a bit more defensively, by letting him come to you, with his strikes being overwhelming and a lot trickier to predict. So providing you're patient, whittling down that health at every opportune moment, you'll be another Jedi to best Rayvis in a duel, only this time you'll give him that honourable warrior's death that he's been waiting a long time for. Very kind of you. One of the legendary enemies you can find just standing around contemplating life on the planet of Kobo is a modified B2 battle droid called Beetu Deetu, essentially a super battle droid that's even more super. The droid's processors have been overclocked, making its attacks quicker and more aggressive, basically being a nice little engineering project for some of the Bedlam Raiders to tinker around with. It's got a slightly different appearance to the standard ones, and it'll attack you more ferociously with its blasters and rockets, chaining different attacks while switching up its fire modes to bombard you with lots of stuff over range. Because Beetu Deetu uses the same weapons as the standard battle droids though, you can use a lot of those attacks against it, by reflecting shots, pushing rockets back, and launching yourself forwards for a lightsaber frenzy whenever the droid has to reload. A legendary enemy in the form of a Magnaguard can also be found on Kobo, hanging around near the Yurt barracks inside the Lucahulk. This guy is known as the Massiff, another highly modified droid, only this one was a pet project conducted by Rayvis himself, creating a hyper-enhanced killing machine hell-bent on fighting, until it's literally a pile of scrap on the floor with all its processors hacked to bits. Despite sounding like a total badass, the Massiff isn't really all that different to the other Magnaguards, perhaps being a little bit more hostile, but not exactly an enemy to worry about getting into a fight with. A lot of its electro-staff lunges can be fairly easy to read and parry, and this is going to sap away at that stamina bar, allowing you to close in for a few melee slashes while its guard's dropped. Just be aggressive, but be careful of those unblockable swinging attacks, and you should be able to take this droid down without too much of a fuss. With the name Urgost, Fist of Rayvis, you might expect someone with a bit of authority to actually own that title, and the first thing you see as you encounter this dude while ascending the observatory is him slamming his massive electro hammer down on some poor stormtrooper's head. This guy means serious business, serving as a Bedlam Smasher, but personally trained by Rayvis to treat his weapon as an extension of his own arm. This basically makes Urgost a bit of a pro with that hammer, shown to be special by donning all of that swanky golden armour, looking like he's just forked out for some new DLC skin. His armour doesn't make him any stronger, but I guess it does make him slightly prouder of his position in the Bedlam Raider ranks, chosen by his leaders to take you on. You can expect Urgost to use a lot of the same tricks as the other hammer-wielding smashers, slow but brutal swings that pack a hell of a punch. And being the powerhouse he is, you're going to want to avoid getting slapped by that hammer at all costs, with it having the potential to knock out massive chunks of health. Be wary of those unblockable attacks, parry the ones you can whenever possible, and keep chipping away at that health using both melee and long range attacks whenever you've got a little moment to do so. And eventually, you'll make short work of Urgost, giving him a warrior's death, just like his master. Probably one of the most sinister droidekas you'll ever see happens to be in this game, in the form of E3VE3. A custom modified variant, complete with enhanced offensive capabilities and prominent belligerence algorithms. Now, despite originally being made to serve the Bedlam Raiders, this thing was reprogrammed a second time with new logic and loyalty protocols, basically overriding Rayvis' initial programming, essentially giving it a mind of its own. E3VE3 is hidden away in a cave on Kobo, guarded by a bunch of B1 melee droids that you'll need to wipe out first. Doing so will make the fight a lot more straightforward, as you'll then only have the Droideka to contend with, which, despite looking pretty cool, tends to function in a similar way to the other Droidekas, just a tad more aggressive with a lot more health than normal, rolling around and blasting away at you with those cannons over range. You're going to need to get past that shield to deal damage, which is generally best done with your trusty lightsaber up close, as reflecting shots back usually won't be enough to break that shield on its own. Because this Droideka is much more durable than the others, you'll probably need to repeat the process of destroying that shield and attacking while it's vulnerable several times after it rolls away. Though just keep the pressure on and you'll eventually be able to take it down, defeating yet another legendary enemy. So the guy right at the top of the Bedlam Raider chain just so happens to be a fallen Jedi called Dagan Gera, who was around a long time back during the High Republic era, but was frozen in a bacta tank after sustaining injuries and essentially left there for a couple of 100 years. I guess it kept him out of trouble at least. Well, that's until you show up and decide to free him. Not a good idea, as you soon find out, as it all goes south from there, with Dagan turning gangster on you not long after. Despite just looking like the lead singer of a Finnish death metal band, Dagan still has quite a lot of power, even though he's lost his arm previously, and you'll have to take him on in 3 big boss battles over the course of your journey. The first being pretty much straight after you let him out of his tank, where you'll face him in a fairly simple lightsaber duel, combining a bunch of standard strikes which can be parried and countered, with a few unblockable ones that you'll need to dodge, including some far-reaching lunges, along with a few lightsaber throws and force push abilities, spicing things up a bit and keeping things varied. Of course, before that health bar bleeds dry, the fight's interrupted and Rayvis drops by to carry Dagan off to safety in his ship. The next time you encounter Dagan is during the infiltration of the Bedlam Raider base, wearing his golden High Republic robes and looking a little bit more up for a fight this time. He'll have to use the same sort of strategies as before, but learn different attack patterns and combos, with him now using a double-bladed lightsaber, which he also likes to split in half to dual-wield using the Force. He'll throw in a few awkward moves to try and trick you out, creating defensive barriers with one lightsaber while he attacks you using the other, and some other attacks that are unblockable of course, also mixed in between the normal strikes to try and catch you out. Dagan will once again escape, causing the arena to collapse, giving him ample time to get away. The final showdown with Dagan is where things get really interesting, with him using a lot of different moves and force tricks to throw you completely off. The third fight begins at the top of the observatory, where you'll join Bo to take him on. And at the start, everything seems quite familiar, with Dagan using a lot of the same lightsaber combos and force moves as in the last encounter. This doesn't last very long though, as he'll start to incorporate a lot of fancy new force abilities and attacks as the fight progresses, charging up force explosions, which can be tricky to avoid, having a large area of effect, along with throwing force projectiles at you too, which also need to be dodged to prevent taking damage. About halfway through the fight, Bo's gonna black out from one of Dagan's mind tricks, and then Dagan will literally flip your world upside down, forcing you onto the ceiling to take him on up there on your own. This is where things start to get a bit trippy, with Dagan using force illusions of himself as decoys to make the fight more hectic and make it more awkward for you to deal damage to him. In case you're wondering which one's the real Dagan, just look for the one with the holographic right arm. Pretty much all of the previous attacks and tricks are thrown into the fight from this point on, along with those clone illusions which are going to attack you as well. Just keep whittling down Dagan's health while remembering his attack patterns, and you'll finally defeat him once and for all. So those are all the Bedlam Raider enemy types and bosses in Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Be sure to check out my other guides covering the Galactic Empire, creatures and Haxian Brood enemies on my channel, and subscribe to see all that new content coming up very soon. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll be seeing you in that next one.